I'm very curious to see what's going to happen with Arizona. For those of you who don't know or haven't been keeping track of it, effectively for like the last, I would say probably about 2+ months that's been going on, Arizona has been having an audit for basically the entire 2020 election, and ultimately just to verify, do what, you're supposed to do in terms of just trying to figure out who actually won in your election. And I think it's been very fascinating and very interesting. And people haven't really been talking about it much because they've just been counting ballots, thoroughly investigating everything, and really doing a very, very rigorous, thorough canvass and audit of the entire 2020 election. You see some of the pictures, it's kind of funny and kind of cool, where it's just like, oh damn, y'all taking this seriously, with like literally like 30-40 pallets of votes, and you gotta go through every single one of them, verify every single little thing, and do all this and do all that. And I will say this is a very good thing, regardless of whether or not he wins or loses. It'll actually just verify what you're supposed to verify, and I think that's a very good thing. At the very least, we'll have certainty whether the orange man won or whether the old man won. Because this ambiguity is ultimately what's caused a lot of problems, which is what I've been saying to a lot of people who are like, well, Trump lost, get over it. I'm like, well, he didn't technically lose. And, you have a bunch of people who, even if he did lose, if you are confident that your candidate won, then just do it. We've done it every single time, for the most part, relatively speaking, every single time a Republican wins, and you guys say, filibuster, this is not right. He did not actually win. And it's like, okay, he actually did win. Okay, never mind. And then you should bring up all this political nonsense just to try and get your guy to see if he actually genuinely won every single time. And like, don't get me wrong, I don't like Bush, okay? But like, if you lost, you lost. Well, 2000's a little bit tricky. I don't want to talk about that. But 2004, you all did that. He did it when Trump effectively won. And, like, Jill Stein went through her specific, like, hey, this isn't right. I should have at least got this many votes in this state. And they're like, all right. And you got Hillary Clinton in the background like, who knows? This might actually turn this state around for me. Next thing you know, it's like, oh, Trump actually got way more votes in this day, and then Hillary Clinton's like, stop. We got to keep up this narrative. Stop. I don't know. But I will say this is going to be very interesting. And I only bring this up because they're finishing up the audit. We'll know soon, probably within 2 weeks from me recording this, who actually specifically won, the level of discrepancies, how bad basically the election effectively was, and if, specifically I think Maricopa County, who actually won in Maricopa County, which ultimately decides the state. So let me make that very clear. It's one of those where I don't think anything structurally or fundamentally will change, because regardless, the old man's in the office and he's not going to be going anywhere, regardless of, once you certify an election, you certify an election. Although in fairness, we've never, if every single state hypothetically went through their audits, respectively speaking, and they went through, hey, X, Y, and Z, Trump actually won like 5 states somehow. That's not going to happen. But if they actually went through that, I think it'd be a very interesting constitutional crisis, because technically speaking, he did not, Trump won the election at that point. So, I don't know. It'd be very interesting. There's going to be a lot of people that are going to be really mad and upset. And I think it's going to be very fascinating when 2024 comes around or 2022 comes around. And I think this is an interesting perspective. And I think this is just going to see really how effectively the future of the elections will effectively go within both political parties. Sorry, that was a lot, and that was probably really confusing. Let me explain my train of thought, because a whole bunch of other states as well are going to be potentially going through their audits. A whole bunch of them are kind of looking at it, and Pennsylvania, Georgia's been like kind of on the news lately, specifically with their like chain of custody issue that's been going on with Georgia. And I think it's going to be very fascinating and very interesting ultimately in terms of who's going to win, or who basically actually technically won. And this feels like a long kind of game that Republicans are kind of doing. And I'm very fascinated that they're going about it in this particular direction, because this is really good. It's kind of smart, because whether or not, because even if, the old man in Biden, if he actually did win, if they can just show enough discrepancies that put into question the legitimacy of even like one or two states, I think there's going to be a lot of people that are going to retroactively look at this and be like, okay, maybe we should have probably just took a step back and at the very least, maybe just been a little bit cautious and kind of just jumping to conclusions and believing a mainstream narrative of, this didn't actually happen, or voter fraud didn't actually occur. Even though we had numerous stories that showed that there was a lot of voter fraud that actually did occur in this particular election, a lot of stuff that was changed at the 11th hour, and a lot of things that ultimately led to incredible amounts of political divisiveness after the election, months after the election. Even today, we're still very politically divisive. Now, I think a big question is, even though my personal intuition says that nothing significant will really come out of this other than probably certain levels of, hey, you know what? Something did happen, but it wasn't enough to really change the election, and some shenanigans. This is more like a PR thing, I feel. While also, at the same time, we really just want to know who actually did win, kind of thing. That's just how I feel like it's going to be and how it's looking right now. That being said, I do find it very interesting that there's a lot of people that are seemingly pretty worried. Basically, the executive branch's attorney general, I believe, the guy who was supposed to be the Supreme Court, Merrick Garland, kind of saying what he said ultimately to try and it seems like, they're going to attempt to step in. And then Arizona's basically like, no, you're not stepping in at all. If you attempt to step in, we're going to have a constitutional crisis on our hands. And it's going to be a very fascinating look into, that aspect. I don't think anything is going to happen with that. But I do find that, there is a lot of specifically Democrats that I think are very worried because ultimately, at the very least, it's going to be hard to confirm a lot of specific votes. Because I think a lot of the votes that really attributed to voter fraud really happened in more specific swing states, and I think more specific super blue states. Like California is pretty woke. Don't get me wrong. I live here, and there's parts of it where it's just Jesus, And there's a lot of people who I think are conservative-minded people who really just didn't care because they knew there's really no point to vote red no matter what. So I think a lot of them kind of just gave their votes to, a Democrat person who would vote for them, or they would just vote just because they would vote blue for them, like no matter what. If there was an actual genuine reality where California was in play, then I think a lot more people who were Republican-minded or people who would vote Republican would probably vote for Republicans ultimately. Man, I'm getting really tongue-tied right now. Like me, for instance, I'm not a Republican or a Democrat. I probably would vote Republican most of the time, but, there's really no point to vote ultimately because your vote really doesn't matter in California, unfortunately, if you vote in that particular way or that particular style. But I do find it very fascinating and very interesting. Just the reaction from the Democrats and ultimately, I don't know, it's just fascinating. Once they just keep using the arguments of it's racist, or it's corruption, et cetera, it's just like, okay, so then there might be something here, but we don't definitively know how far it is or how bad it is. And, this might at the very least change certain perspectives on how things should go and how things will go. Arizona's going to have the results effectively, which a lot of them are saying that at the very bare minimum, there's going to be discrepancies, which is probably just going to happen. I don't know by how much, but, in certain states, it could be very significant. If they do an audit in Georgia, where just in that chain of custody thing was literally by far the margin of victory for Trump and Biden, that could actually swing that state. Pennsylvania, I don't even know what's going to happen with that. Wisconsin is very fascinating and very interesting, and I don't know. We'll have to see.